I acknowledge the traditional owners, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional owners of the land on which we are gathered tonight, to their leaders, past, present and emerging. What a turnout. Thank you so much for coming. I thought we deserved to give ourselves a birthday party. Not just for us, but also for the people that we need to remember. So tonight is that night. I've got a lot of people to thank. And there's a very high probability that I'm going to forget people. So I've taken out an insurance policy in the form of a postcard, a green postcard that's within your bags. And the invitation is that for anyone that I forget, please let me know. We're going to add it to the official event website. And there'll be a facility which we'll arrange where you can drop it in a bag at the end of the night on the way out. So with that caveat, to the Minister, the Honourable Paul Fletcher, Minister for Communications, Cyber Safety and the Arts, Shadow Assistant Minister Tim Watts, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight is a very special night. As we sit here celebrating 30 years of the internet in Australia, we can rest assured that all over the nation, people are enjoying the fruits of a long tradition. A tradition that didn't originate in Australia, actually in America. Nevertheless, one that has captured the imagination of all of us. Spawned an industry, and of that industry, many offshoots. And like all phenomena that take hold of the public imagination, the overwhelming effect is very positive. But of course, with all revolutions, there is a downside. We're not going to shy away from acknowledging the fact that there is a dark side, and in some cases there can be overindulgence, and even in the young cases of addiction. And of course, I'm referring to Halloween and the sugar industry, who's also rejoicing tonight at this amazing revolution that has captured the imagination of Australians. On that note, I have a few apologies, one being from the Commissioner for Cyber Safety, Julian and Grant, who being an American is doing the reasonable thing and monitoring her own children's sugar consumption. The retired Justice of the High Court, Michael Kirby, who has been at these occasions before, and who I was again privileged to speak to about a month ago. I don't know if you've seen the interview, but he made a few very pointed comments. The first one actually was that he chastised us at the last event that he spoke at here in 2008, when he said how disappointed he was there were so few women in the audience. And he really was giving us a signal that he expected more of the industry. And so I'm very pleased to say tonight, just looking around, and we'll have video evidence to corroborate that we've probably got at least 30% female attendance, and it could even be higher, and we will do an official count of that. So congratulations to the you've actually come out in force tonight, and I think you're sending a very clear signal. So the male dominance associated with this sector is under threat.
Under threat?
Male dominance is under threat.
Peter,
Oh, it's over. Nice, they're declaring victory. Well done. Okay, now, this event really only occurred as an idea 3 months ago. And reflecting on the significance of 30 years, and looking around and seeing that there was no actual official celebration, I thought, well, maybe, it's time we did something. And of course, I consulted my trusted friend and dog, Carlo, don't let his cuteness fool you. He's a very astute animal. And I said to him, what do you think the chances are that we could pull this off? And his response was to say, well, if you can get enough people to support you, I think it'll probably work. But he said, of course, I can't possibly be involved. And I said, why not? And he said, well, because on the internet, everyone thinks I'm a human.
Yeah, you're done, sorry.
That's it. That was the entertainment for tonight. I wanted to focus on what inspired me very early on in my involvement with the industry was the human dimension of the internet. And I think in 2001, or 2002 in fact, a friend of mine called James Prineas put together a website. In fact, it was more than a website. It was a fully fledged internet portal, well before the advent of social media, where he attempted to create a cultural repository of the history, the archaeology, the natural history, the genealogy of an island in Greece called Kythera, which is actually my ancestral island on my parents, on my father's side. And this portal still exists today, and it has thousands of users. It's trilingual. Even from the inception, it was trilingual. And you can search, and the thing that was significant about it was that 2002, he created a facility where people could upload their own content. They could put their own histories on there, and it is an amazingly deep and rich site. But the thing that struck me, and we had the launch in 2003, I think it was, just after the site launched, and there were about this many people in the room, and they were the diaspora from this island. A very ancient island that is mentioned in Homer and was featured in the Peloponnesian War. So it's of great significance. But the thing that struck me more than anything was that sitting there in front of that group of people that were looking at photographs like this, there were men in the front row, 90-year-old men with walking sticks, with their eyes filling with tears, as they recognised people that they hadn't seen for 75 years, since their childhood. And it struck me that the power of the internet to unite communities that had been separated by space and time was a very highly profound, significant and profound moment for me, and it really brought home the fact that the thing about the technology, which of course we will celebrate and recognise tonight, is not the technology per se, but the profound and transformative effect that it can have on humanity, to bring us, to unite us together as a common people on a common planet. A second anecdote that I'll share occurred in 2000, actually around the time of the Olympic Games. You might remember a blind man called Bruce Maguire made a complaint to the Human Rights and Equal Opportunities Commission about the fact that as a blind man he could not access the official so-called, or the Olympic website. And the reason was that the way the site had been developed, it didn't follow the protocols around disability access, and he was using a text-to-speech reader that would be converting things that he couldn't read with his eyes into things that he could still apprehend. And so he thought there was a legitimate basis for a complaint, and in fact it was upheld by the Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission, and became a very profound, I think, signal to the industry that more needed to be done to create an internet that was more inclusive. And as a result of that decision, we actually went and met with Bruce Maguire, and Sandra Davey was sitting on the AMEA table, who was then running AMEA, which was the sister organisation to the Internet Industry Association, which I was running at the time. We agreed together to do some work in the area to try and raise the awareness around, creating an internet that was accessible for all. And what was very poignant, and we created a task force and we created an action plan, and we actually, I think, tried to get the message out that this issue of inclusiveness was going to be a powerful driver in the way that we shape the usage of the technology moving forwards. And then another interesting thing happened that was allied to this, and there was a man that ran the sister organisation to the AAA in America, and his name was Dennis Hayes. And in fact, he was the inventor of the PC modem that enabled PCs to connect to the internet. So in every respect, he could be considered a pioneer. And I had the fortune to meet Dennis a few times, and he explained how it was to innovate. Oh, actually, on his dining room table, it was one of those classic startup stories where he sat down with another man called Dale Hetherington, a friend of his, and they developed the protocols by which modems could connect PCs to other modems and therefore to other PCs. That's right. PC, modem, PC. Now, that is an interesting story in itself, but I think it gets more interesting when I found out that Dennis was beginning to suffer from macular degeneration and himself losing his eyesight, and was complaining of the very same thing that we'd seen in Australia, where he was increasingly unable to utilise the medium that in many respects you could argue he helped to popularise. And so when he came to Australia, we managed to utilise that story as a further, to add further momentum to the kind of work we were doing. So I just wanted to share those things to really amplify the need to remember our common humanity as we move forward in the development of this amazing medium. The aim of tonight is to do just that. So we're going to remember the technical pioneers. I'm very, very happy that we've got with us tonight some of the technical pioneers. We've got Professor Bob Kummerfeld and Piers Lauder from the University of Sydney. And we've got Ian Peter, who was the founder of the first commercial ISP in Australia, Pegasus. And I know that that may be slightly contested by the people in Western Australia that had dialects. And in fact, when I first connected to the net in '89 in Perth, I was, and using the bulletin board with what was a very slow modem by today's standards. Again, the profundity of the experience was really not lost. I'd like to thank a number of people that really moved in very quickly to support the vision for tonight's event. And I'd like to thank, in particular, David Spence, and where is David? And Chris Hancock. Now these guys served as former chairman of the Internet Industry Association and were very supportive of me at the time, but when I approached them this year, 3 months ago, and said, look, what do you think about this? They said, you have to do it. And they stepped up and they took tables and they called their friends, and the result is in part what we're seeing tonight. I'd like to thank the volunteers and the other people that have helped me organise this event. So to my partner Kalyani, who kept me on task. To Gina Panner, who's actually Michael Malone's assistant, and Michael kindly lent me some of Gina's time, and she's been responsible for some of the graphics that you see and a lot of the organisation behind the scenes. So thank you, Gina. And to Angela Stevens, who was the mover and shaker behind a lot of the calls and the development of spreadsheets and the ability to monitor who was coming and who was not. The fact that I think everyone has a seat tonight is a tribute to her organisational skills, so thank you, Angela. And to all the volunteers that have come today to help us on the eve of this great celebration, I thank you as well. Natasha and Louise and the other Louise, and Krish from Melbourne who came to this, and Stephen Che from IBM. All of you, thank you. Now, just before I introduce the Minister, Paul Fletcher, to come and give the opening of the welcome from the government, I do want to acknowledge a couple of things. It's been impressed upon me not to forget the volunteers, people that are the unsung heroes of the internet. So we can name and identify some of the technical heroes. It's very, very hard to identify the people that worked behind the scenes, doing the voluntary work, going to the committee meetings, helping shape the technical standards, or maybe even some of the policy work that we now enjoy the fruits of. So without knowing who all those people are, I think we at least want to acknowledge their existence and the role that they've played. So to the volunteers. to the industry associations, and I mean, you know my background, that we never worked alone, and there are other associations that are here tonight that I specifically made a point of inviting in recognition that this has been a shared enterprise, and it's always a very difficult thing to represent an industry in its totality. And so the various associations all perform complementary, in some cases overlapping roles, but they are representing their own constituency, they're representing their own particular areas of expertise within that constituency and the social issues in which they're engaged, and the technical issues. And so I think to all those associations, and I've listed them in the little souvenir guide tonight, I won't say them all now, but many of them are here, and to those that are here through individual representatives, I thank you and acknowledge you all. And the fallen are the people that are no longer with us, and we will be toasting them, but I want to mention them by name, and if they were with us now, they would be here. I'm certain of that, but to my friend and colleague Dave McClure, who ran the US Internet Industry Association, passed away about 3 years ago, to Phil Alexander, who was on the board of the AAA and is known and loved by many people that we know, Michael Ward, formerly of Aussie Mail, which many of you would know, and he also ran the Australian Republican movement, which is where I first met him, to Mike Rothery from the Attorney General's Department, who is a very towering figure within the history of the emergency response paradigm, and his profound knowledge and understanding of leadership. And Alistair, you acknowledge that as well. To Barry Hall of Telstra, a very humble man, a very dear friend of many in the industry that did a lot of quiet work behind the scenes to help promote, in particular, cybersecurity. We acknowledge him and miss him. Brenda Ainsley, who many of you know was pioneering within the Australian Computer Society, was one of the first women in a leadership role there. And to Ian Burks, who ran the AAA as their chief executive. All these people were very beautiful people. They were good, you know the saying, only the good die young? These were good people, and I'm really sad that they're not here. I hope at some level they can feel our thanks for them. And then there's the person in the box. The people, again, that we don't know, that we don't remember, that have come and gone, that will remain unsung, but at least we can recognise them in a symbolic gesture.
Chris Winter!
Chris Winter, thank you. Well, please put it on the postcard and we'll add that to the ledger. And then finally, of course, I've said the volunteers through our sponsors, without whom this could not have occurred. So to Superloop, ARNet, Cisco, Palo Alto Networks, Encrypt Cellular, and to our official media partners, IT Wire, Andrew Matler, My Security Media and Chris Covage, and our colleagues in America that run the Cyberwire. Thank you to all of you all as well for your support. This has been a much longer opening speech than I'd planned, but I'm just covering myself and making sure that we really don't overlook anyone. I'd like to now invite the Minister, the Honourable Paul Fletcher, Minister for Communications, Cyber Safety and the Arts, to come up and give the official government welcome and address.
Well, thank you very much, Peter, and looking around the room, what an amazing Rolodex Peter Coronius has. Would you all thank Peter Coronius for organising this event? Well, friends, it is hard to think of one single force or phenomenon that has affected our nation over the last 30 years as much as the arrival of the internet. It has been a very profound force. It has comprehensively changed, when you run down the list is extraordinary. It's changed the way that we buy and sell cars and homes. It's changed the way that we search for jobs. It's changed the way that we find and read books, the way that we access and listen to music, the way that we choose a route when we're walking or driving, the way that we bank and transact, the way that we book accommodation, the way that we travel, the way that we book restaurants. It's changed the way we find partners for life or for one night. It's changed the way that we find information. It's changed the way that we record, store and transport data. It's changed the way that we keep public records. It's changed the way that we control large infrastructure and utility systems. It's changed the way that we carry voice telephony. It's changed the way that we track animals on farms. It's changed the way that we access collections in libraries. It's changed the way that we research family history. It's changed the way that we find recipes, that we gather investment information, that we promote ourselves, our businesses, our causes, that we keep in touch with friends and families. It's changed fundamentally the way we do just about everything. And I don't think any of that was anticipated in 1989 when that first 56 kilobit per second link was set up between Australia and Hawaii. So it was, of course, a physical and a technical platform that was being established in a very tentative way back in 1989, built on the basic protocols that the internet relies on. And of course, at first, the internet in Australia and globally was mainly a specialised resource for academic and scientific communities, but it exploded into mainstream use. You know, the term exponential growth is widely overused, but there is no industry of which that term could be more accurately used than the internet, both here in Australia and globally. And of course, one thing that was very important about the internet in Australia that's not part of the story of the internet in the US is that the way that it broke down our isolation, the way that it broke down the tyranny of distance, and the fact that in industry after industry where Australian consumers were frankly used to putting up with pretty second-rate service and products and quality, suddenly you could buy the best that the world offered. So the internet has profoundly transformed Australia in a way that our friends in the US don't quite understand. That the force of the internet and its economic significance and its social significance. So this is absolutely worth something acknowledging, celebrating, marking this 30-year anniversary. And there's so many people in this room who've played an important part in that. And of course, we need to acknowledge the computer scientists and the academics and so many folks in the university and research community who first saw something that the rest of us didn't appreciate at the time. We need to acknowledge those who founded internet service providers, including in the early days when essentially they were themselves refugees from computer science departments wanting to hold on to that connectivity. We need to acknowledge the telcos, which played an important role in taking what had been something underused in small communities, research and specialist communities, and making it available. And we do need to acknowledge the marketers and the business people who are so important in taking the internet in Australia and globally from being something for the early adopters to being something for absolutely the mass market. And you notice I haven't even mentioned the lawyers and the policy people. I won't do that. So, ladies and gentlemen, the change that we've seen in 30 years has been phenomenal. And when you think about it, it's been reinforced by a range of other factors. I think this was more luck than management. But at the same time as the technological breakthroughs that made the internet possible, over that same period we saw a range of other forces, certainly here in Australia and some of them global as well. We saw the deregulation of telecommunications, which helped take the internet into the mass market. Had we still had Telecom Australia as a government-owned entity, I think it might have been a longer and more tortuous journey. Of course, we saw deregulation in other industries like banking or airlines, which also really drove the way that the internet underpinned, for example, how we now book travel and air tickets. We saw, of course, the explosion in mobile technology. And so many Australians now see the mobile device as the way they access the internet. Many people, in fact, see mobiles and the internet as synonymous. And so if we hadn't seen the explosion in mobile technology, would we have seen the internet become the pervasive force that it is today? And I think one other thing that we've seen over the last 30 years in Australia that's been part of the growth of the internet as well has been the extraordinary increase in the percentage of people who are undergoing or have completed tertiary education. So I think a whole range of forces have come together, some of them quite serendipitously, to absolutely transform the way we live. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think we all, the moment we got the invitation to this event, thought, yes, this is something absolutely worth celebrating, worth acknowledging. This is a significant milestone, so congratulations everybody in the room for your involvement in what's been done.
I'm now going to invite David Spence to come up and give the vote of thanks to the Minister. And before he takes the podium, I do want to acknowledge an omission that Responsible Technology Australia, who will be launching here tonight, is the major sponsor for tonight's event, and we'll be hearing from them after the main course. So thank you guys. I'm sorry I left, the logo wasn't on the slide, and of course without the visuals. Okay, we'll take that offline.
Well, I have two tasks tonight. One is to thank the Minister, which I'll get to in a second, and the other one is to make a toast to you, the industry, as in each of you, as I've never made a toast to the industry before. So, Minister, thank you very much for tonight. I'll just say that the Minister, I'm in the Minister's electorate and he's doing a great job there. And please keep it up, Minister, and we'll keep voting for you. That was very impressive how, and it's certainly something we need to take away, is how the tyranny of distance has changed because of the internet coming to Australia, and how it has made Australia a much closer part of the world. So thank you, Minister, for that. It is great to have a Minister that's been in this industry nearly as long as I have, or probably the same amount of time that I have, and who has stuck to this industry through all the various roles that he's had. We now have a Minister who has the huge task of making sure too much tech reg doesn't come our way and we don't have a tech wreck. We will have a Minister who knows the industry and knows what it means to look after this industry. Certainly, Minister, it's in your hands now for the next couple of years, we know, so it's all up to you, and thank you again for coming tonight. Now, charge your glasses to the pioneers, the fallen heroes that were listed in this book, to some friends who can't make it tonight because of cancer, especially Ian McGregor, to those who've helped create, sustain, and really push this revolution in Australia, which we call the internet. To the policy wonks, to the technocrats, the political operators, and I'll even say the lawyers. Peter, I've seen you in the room, and Patrick Fair, well done, keeping us all in line over the years. The early adopters, especially the high-end users that helped drive the growth in the early days and dragged everybody along behind them. This is a community with many different perspectives, but a common vision: to see the internet develop to its full potential in this country and empower a safe and open and secure communications revolution, driving productivity and output for this nation. So, ladies and gentlemen, a toast to the internet. Thanks.
Last time I saw you, your hand was all faded, showing you just came back and came over since today. Wow, that's a problem.
We're going to invite our panel to come up now. If you're happy to see, now would be the time to go back because we're going to have a fairly short, sharp session with, I'm not meant to look at the camera. A short, sharp session on from four people that come from very different backgrounds, all of whom are very well known in the industry. Some are pioneers of the technology side of things, some are policy pioneers, some are advocates, and some are internationally acknowledged experts. And so with that mix, we have a very, how can I describe Charmaine Tan? Let me read from her bio. Charmaine Tan is a new member of the Cybersecurity Advisors Network, who I officially represent. And Charmaine is advising C-suite executives on how to attain best practice in cybersecurity. She's just written a book called The Cyber Risk Leaders, where she interviews 70 CIOs from around the world. And we're actually giving away a copy of her book tonight when we get to the lucky prize draw. By the way, in your show bags, there is a ticket stapled to the bag. You need to hang on to that because we've got some pretty substantial prizes tonight. I mean substantial prizes. So if you're around for the draw, which will be around the time of dessert, you'll be very surprised to see what we're going to pull out. So let's invite the panel up here now. which I mean she will introduce each of the panelists, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you, Peter. Alright, first up we have Alistair McGibbon to join us at the stage, and he actually needs no introduction. You can give him a hand. So Alistair is the current Chief Strategy Officer at Cyber CX, and Alistair is formerly the National Cybersecurity Advisor to the Prime Minister and the head of Australian Cybersecurity Centre. We all know him for implementing the government's cybersecurity strategy, but prior to that, Alistair was also Australia's first e-safety commissioner. And next up, we have Sandra Davey. So Sandra is the MD of Product Space. She was a GM of the first 4G service available to consumers in Australia, and she has served as a chair and non-exec director at various associations, including CHOICE, the Australian Interactive Media Industry Association, and ORDA. And next up, we have Michael Malone. Micah is the former founder and CEO of the IINet Limited and chairman and non-executive director of various boards, including Superloop. And Michael was 2012 Australian Entrepreneur of the Year, winner of the Charles Todd Medal, amongst other top recognitions as well. And he was inducted into the Telecommunication Hall of Fame in 2019. Very impressive. And finally, we have the lovely lady, Karen Kuhlman. Director with IBM ANZ and a member of the global IBM Government Program Leadership Team. She is also the Deputy Chair of New South Wales Telco Authority and has extensive board experience with on over 10 public and private boards and committees. And currently serves on 4 of them. Very impressive. So I feel like I'm in the presence of great pioneers and Hall of Fame leaders, so it's really an honor to be here and hear from them today. So without further ado, just thought it'd be good to hear from each and every one of you, maybe 60 seconds blurb on your personal sentiments on how has the last 30 years of internet been for you and what are the best things about them. Right. Karen, go for it. But anyway, well, like 30 years ago, but not long after. In 1990, I was doing my master's in communications and IT law, and I was living on a sheep station outside of a regional university where I was lecturing, and I started to use this thing called ARNet, and it absolutely was the beginning of something that changed not only my life, but life as we know it, as Paul outlined. So that was the research and academic network, but I was there to do communications and IT law, and I could see that it was about to change the world. And I wanted to be part of it, and having been a lawyer, it also had huge implications for the law as we know it, because there was always a connection with jurisdiction, and it's a global network, and so that gave rise to lots of issues and 30 years of work. Yeah, we definitely can dive a bit deeper into that later on, and thank you for that, Karen. Michael?
I sometimes think this is a bit like Alzheimer's, you know, those early years are far more sharp today than the more recent ones. But, and we were talking earlier on about some of those first people to connect to the internet, and you know, it was all people like researching genealogy, people with very niche interests or you know, that felt isolated in their communities. They were the first people to get connected up. The first government department I'm aware of in Western Australia's main roads. You know, so it was really amazing in those first couple of years, the sort of people that were getting online. Our public high school were using French lessons with people, good kids in France, that sort of thing. It was just amazing. And it did, as the Minister outlined before, I think just opened up so many opportunities for people to communicate.
Me? Yeah.
Matt, Ted, are you listening?
Yes!
Good. I'm just checking on the singles tables at either end, which can get a bit rowdy.
But we are the closest to the bar, so hurry up.
Typical Matt.
You're all wearing your hats too.
For me, 1989, I I'm about 19 years old. I'm working for an activist organisation in Canberra, a policy lobby group. They get a connection to something called the internet through Pegasus Networks, 1989. I've somehow taught myself DOS over summer, as you do. And I connected this thing to the internet and no word of a lie. I mean, I still remember the first moment when I logged on and I thought, fuck, this is going to change the world, right? This will change the world. And because I was an activist as well, I was like connected all of a sudden to all of these activists around the world, and I was sold.
I joined the police in 1989, the Australian Federal Police. Very similar careers. My brother had introduced me to the internet as an engineering student, dialing up on some kind of modem into the University of Computer a few years earlier. And I remember changing banks when I was posted overseas with the police to be with a bank who allowed me to do internet banking, so I could still deal with an Australian banks from America. But my whole career has been around the detritus that comes from internet connectivity. I'm the glass half empty guy on the panel.
So maybe we'll start off first then with Sandra. You were just chatting earlier and then you have some really good short stories maybe that you would like to share with the rest of us.
I think firstly it's good to get the swearing out, and it's good to get the swearing out.
Wine at the table.
And the very few women that are on the internet apparently. I've got a couple of one thing that's really, I was thinking about kind of big things, right? And we've all been involved in super big things. I reckon I've been an IronNet customer for like 20 years because I love you. And I had a zip. I had a top 3 mail account. Who remembers top 3? There's people in this room that remember top 3. When I had to retire it and get a bloody Gmail account, I took a photo of my top 3 server settings and I still got them in my iPhone. But that wasn't quite the long story. Is anyone from Osley here tonight? Graham Greenleaf, Andrew Mowbray. Like I was thinking over the last few days, what have been the big things that we've done here in Australia? And we've done lots of great things. But I've been on the kind of user layer. So for those dudes out here that know the TCP/IP stack, which ends at layer 7, I'm 8 and 9. So Amy, you're in the back, we're the user layer, the content layer. So I've been thinking about what made the biggest impact in Australia, and one of the ones that I came up with was Osley. So how many people in this room have used Osley? Exactly, right? And what it did was it took a public service which had been controlled by a duopoly, and it was another way of delivering a public service. So for me, Osley was really profound, and I got to be involved in it. I'm sorry that Andrew Mowbray and Graham Greenleaf and Peter Van Dyke and Jeff, he was the cutest. Here. So Osley is one of my stories about kind of impact. The second very quick story was I was talking to George Fong the other day from Charity Internet, and I asked him what was the most profound, impactful thing that happened to you when you were running an ISP, and do you know what he said? Oi, you up the back. Thank you. He said that. George Fong said that one of the most important things that he did as the CEO of an ISP, he was running a regional Victorian ISP, and a single mum on the border of Victoria and South Australia stabbed her feet for months, ringing him saying, this thing called the internet's coming and I really need it for my kids for school. And the day that he could ring her up and say that they had put a POP in that regional town, in a tiny little town called Eden Hope in Victoria, and gave her kids access to the internet, that's pretty fucking amazing. So
you mentioned different issues earlier that arose as well, right? And what are your views on that? And we were talking about like in the context of 1996, the national inquiry into the content of online services. Maybe you can share with us what are the different issues that came off the back of that.
So this fabulous thing arrives, and then the next thing that we need to ask is, well, how is it going to be used in a way that gives us the level of certainty and some of the protections that we have in the offline world, so in relation to, privacy, objectionable content, how to protect children, how to get your contracts enforced, how to actually get paid or get your books, all of those sorts of issues. So very, very, small task, and a very small team, of which we've got some people here, and David Dobson is one of them. And at the APA, as it was then known, we ran this national inquiry, and at that inquiry, I think there was probably about 100 people in this room, maybe more, that actually came and made presentations and submissions to me and to David and everyone else. And look, it was a time of great excitement. It's wonderful to see what people could, envisage the internet to be. But at the same time, it was clear to us that it wasn't going to deliver on all of those things if it was going to be a wild west. And it's going to be full of all the nasties. So it was about getting that balance right. And one of the hardest things I found in my career is actually being in government, which actually have to come up with solutions. The industry is raising problems and roll the data and, present it as best you can. But when you're in government, you actually have to try and find solutions. And so, that's what we tried to do. We had codes of practice, we had takedown notices that became Schedule 5 and then Schedule 7 of the Broadcasting Services Act, which then led to the Safety Commissioner role. So, and it really has been a process of continually improving since then. We don't have all the answers, we probably never have all the answers, but the only way that we're going to be able to use it is to make it a safe, secure place, but we also get all the benefits in the internet offers to us. So that's a lifelong journey. I think we're all safely in careers that will take us out to the end of our time.
Yeah, since Karen brought it up, maybe Alistair, you want to talk about your observations as being the Australia's first safety commissioner. Were there any issues that you've noticed or things that you had to overcome during your stint there?
Yeah, so thank you, Karen, and I should acknowledge that Paul Fletcher was the was then the minister that led out under the Abbott government the formation of the Safety Office, and I think what we saw, Karen, from your first interactions with Schedules 5 and 7, and you can't get a more complex, arcane thing than 5 and 7, led eventually to society realising that you had to take further steps to protect people. As I said, I've always dealt with the bits that are the negative side that come with what is a remarkable connected technology, and we should acknowledge, by the way, the efforts of Peter here to bring us together tonight. When Peter called to say he was going to do it, I said he was stupid. And I was wrong. I'd also say that when I worked when I was in the Federal Police at the Royal Commission into the New South Wales Police Service, into police corruption, and I was on the child sex reference. And we made a conclusion in the early 1990s or mid-1990s that the internet would not be used by child sex offenders because they were so good at offending offline and that they wouldn't use the internet. I was wrong with that, nor did I buy Google shares, Samantha, when they listed thinking that they were too expensive, and I was proven wrong there too. So I'm not great at predicting how the internet would go. But what I would say is society has recognised the need to reflect offline values. And former Prime Minister Turnbull used to have a phrase, and he said, the rule of law should apply equally online as it does offline. The internet should reflect society broadly. That means you're free to be anonymous in many places. You can go about your business in a way that is unhindered and unfettered by government. But should you do something that is bad, whether it's objectionable content, and I think after Christchurch we've seen again a shift with the Christchurch Accord, where governments around the world have recognised the need to reflect societal values. I've had a remarkable career, the last half of it, the last 15 or so years, benefiting, frankly, from that increasing realisation of society. My one regret, if I could say that, is that law enforcement has not taken a volume gain when it comes to fighting cybercrime. And Minister, if I could just say to you, I think the next frontier for government is to have law enforcement step up to be protecting the Australian community in a way online as it does offline. But I've seen progressive improvement in the way government deals with it. So it's a credit to government.
And I'm thinking, Michael, maybe you can share from your perspective, because through the lens of being on the board of NBN, 7 West Media, Channel 7, you know, what's the impact of digital platforms on the supply of news and journalistic content, and the implications of this for media content creators, advertisers and consumers?
Hardly any. I give a little bit of a tip. First, I always wanted to be a journalist growing up, and that was where I wanted to be until I got an inspirational maths teacher who took me in a different direction. But so it's very funny now, two things, to be sitting on the board of 7 West, but also to have my 17-year-old son tell me he wants to be a journalist. I don't think the internet, I think there's only 3 trends that I've always noticed you can rely upon with the internet is that demand goes up, so speeds are going to be faster, usage is going to be higher. If you're a business in a long supply chain and you're in the middle of that, you're fucked, right? So the internet disintermediates people. And you know, the last one is that every big step jump in the internet over time has been driven by consumers wanting to share with each other. Now, business tends to get you scale, and then businesses will take advantage of that scale and ubiquity. And those have been the drivers, I guess. For journalism, it's been really interesting because, of course, that democratisation of the internet has meant that everyone's a news producer these days, everyone's you know, a journalist in some ways. But it's also meant that there's an expectation that this is free. And that's ultimately really bad for democracy. It really is. You know, I think I will recognise again the Minister has I'm on a board now for Regional Small Publishers, a grant that's being done by a $50 million grant program, which is supporting journalism in the regions of Australia. And I don't think it's got much recognition, but it's that's also one of the 8 recommendations that came out of the ACCC's reviews of the big giants as well. And I mean, I don't know the details, but I was quite shocked to see this arrangement between Facebook and News Corporation announced this week as well, to see if Facebook will actually provide funds to journalists. Look, these are green shoots, but I don't think, you know, journalism left to itself, subject to those demands out there, is just going to die in this environment unless it has the support of you know, government and, you know, some form of regulatory intervention.
Thank you for that. So very quickly, maybe we'll just give each other 30 seconds, free for all. If you had no time again, what would you do differently in shaping the internet we know now? And if you can just add on also maybe the next 30 years, what do you think is it going to look like for you? Let's try to do it in 30 seconds. Peter's like reminding me of time.
Well, I don't think I'm doing a lot differently, to be honest. There were a lot of people that said because the internet can't be regulated, you should do nothing. I never really believed that. I probably wouldn't have argued so long and hard with those people and just got on with it. So that was one thing. In terms of looking forward, I would. I think we're about to enter a whole new frontier when we start to see the application of AI and quantum and machine learning in everything we do as well. And I would just say that the challenge is to ensure that technology is used to improve our lives, you know, technology for good. And it can be used for good and bad. And so we really need to be, you know, internally vigilant to ensure that, you know, there are ethical frameworks built within the use of AI. We do reflect on how we're using technology and to ensure that the freedoms and the, you know, the fabulous things that are part of being, you know, the benefits of being in a liberal Western democracy are not lost as a result of technology being used in the wrong ways. And that's incumbent on all of us to engage in that.
Thanks, Carol.
Fight the good fight.
Yeah.
I guess I'd echo the same thing. I've just been, you know, honoured and it's been a joy to be part of this. I can't see how it changed anything. You know, I still think myself very fortunate after for 30 years to still be excited every morning to read what's happening today and how the industry can shift overnight. I would say looking forward, there's that foundations in every technology, it doesn't matter what it is, moves in generations. And our first generation is the inventors, so many of them here tonight. The builders that I'd like to consider myself part of, who say this stuff is wild, we've got to implement it everywhere. But then that third generation that just grows up where this is just ubiquitous. It's just, the internet is like electricity or a global telephone network. We wouldn't dream of a global point of sale system when you were building, until telephony became ubiquitous. And electricity allows you to invent things like microwaves and TVs that, we would not have dreamt of when electricity was being made to use to run the bills. So I think the internet's going to be the same. My kids are growing up in a world where the internet's just in the power socket. It just works all the time, and they're just going to dream of things that we could never even conceive of.
I hate talking about the future, so I'm going to talk about the present. No. There's a few things. One, we need to stop for a minute and think about Arnett and the guys at the technical and academic community. They must straight into the internet, so thank you. Thank you very much. That's kind of the network itself, but stop for a second and think about the power and the importance of what the ABC has brought us. They have consistently won numerous content awards over the years, and they bring us a vibrancy that is so incredibly important. So thank you to the ABC. And there's something else that was really important that I wanted to say. I can't remember. I'll probably remember when he's speaking.
To interrupt you at any time.
I will.
Okay. What would I do differently? I do more to work with law enforcement agencies, frankly, to protect them. I think that is the missing link. When I started in 2003 at the Australian High Tech Crime Centre, people asked, why would you do anything about cybercrime? If I asked this audience today whether they knew someone this week who'd either been a victim or had been a victim themselves of either an attempt or a successful fraud or other things online, most people put their hands up. So the reality is that's what I would have done differently, and that's what I'll try to do in the next couple of years.
I've remembered it. I have to say it. I went back looking through my documents and I found a video interview that I did in 2010. I said two things. I'm really worried about online privacy and who the fuck can trust Google and Facebook. Now, no, I appreciate it here tonight, but honestly, the tech companies, we can no longer say that we cannot help with the harm that's going online. Here's one thing I've learned. The gnarly problems we've got on the internet, we can't solve them alone. Civil society can't solve them, the tech sector can't solve them, the academic technical community can't solve them. We have to solve them together, and the private sector needs to be in that conversation. So that's my activist minute just to end.
Let's just give them a hand again.
Who's going to give a very quick vote of thanks to the panel. Thank you.
Some of the key takeaways that I sort of really picked up from all four of the panelists, and even sort of what Charmaine sort of wrapped up as well. I think if we think about the last 30 years of what really got us here, some of the work that obviously the ministers did around sort of building out that sort of online security or key safety commissioner, having Alistair as our first key safety commissioner. I think some of the things that really resonate in my mind is to continue our efforts around how to ensure that we have a safe and secure internet. I think a lot of the work that needs to be done and we need to continue to do is really around protecting the vulnerable people. I think there's a lot of people inside our country that really need to be protected. I think there's an ageing population that we really need to think about how we protect them because they are being targeted all the time. I think a lot more work needs to be done around protecting our critical infrastructure, which is obviously being targeted all the time. And it's one of those things that I think what got us here for the last 30 years, that same playbook probably is not going to get us for the next 30 years as well. So I think it definitely is something that all of us have to come together, whether it's government, public, the private sector coming together, vendors, everyone in this room has got a part to play. I think it's incumbent on all of us to ensure that we keep on actually having and changing that narrative to the side of our own organisations and everyone else's organisations. So with that, thank you very much and continue. It was a great night.
Okay. Next up. I would like to invite up to the podium shortly Michelle Levine. Now, we did mention at the beginning of the night that there was going to be a launch announcement tonight. And in fact, it is Responsible Technology Australia that is stepping up. Do you remember we were talking about some of the challenges that we face as a society and the way that we're adapting to that? And I think the panel made some very astute observations about what they would change about the internet. And I think that the sentiment around reflecting the kind of norms that we expect within a society need to be somehow, and we don't really know the answer to that, but somehow some thinking should be done around how we migrate in the next 30 years to, with the wisdom of hindsight, what would we do differently if, let's say we were 30 years ahead from now, what would we be wanting to think about today that can ensure that the next 30 years of the development of the internet delivers all the promise that we hope for and maybe starts to address more of the human issues. So I'd like to invite Michelle Levine to the podium. She is the CEO of Roy Morgan. It's a household word, you must know, as a definitive source of public opinion and evidence that is often used in policy making. Michelle will be speaking on behalf of Responsible Technology Australia, and I think it's better if I leave it to her to outline the aims and the aspirations of this new organisation, which we welcome on the policy front. Thank you very much for your support of this event, and I'll hand over to Michelle.
Thanks very much, and good evening, everybody. So this evening we've actually heard everybody talking about celebrating 30 years of the internet, but today also represents another milestone, another reason to celebrate. Today we witness Responsible Technology Australia, or RTA, stepping onto the digital stage. And as Peter said, it's almost as if it's been building to this conversation, which we didn't realise was going to happen. But it couldn't be happening at a better time. We find ourselves as Australians riding a storm of distrust, of sectional self-interest, policy claim and counterclaim, and this involves the regulators, it involves government, tech giants like Facebook and Google, and all the other players. But as CEO of Roy Morgan, I know that listening to the voice of the people, listening to what people are worried about, is actually where this all needs to begin. And of course, Roy Morgan's been listening to those voices, asking people how they felt about things since 1941. And so as CEO of Roy Morgan, I'm really proud to have been, first of all, invited to participate as part of the RTA, and then to have agreed as a company to become a founding partner of Responsible Technology Australia. So RTA is very early in its stages, but it will be a uniquely Australian voice for responsibility and data security in the Australian technology sector. It aims to benefit all Australian users of technology. It's a convening not-for-profit which aims to begin a dialogue across sectors. So we don't have all the answers. This is the beginning of a dialogue, the beginning of a conversation, gathering people's views across a whole range of sectors about how we might build what you'd hope would be a common sense coalition in relation to technology, its risks and rewards. So to mark this event, you would be unsurprised to know that Roy Morgan's done a survey. And so, very simple survey asking the Australian people whether on balance they think that the internet has brought more problems than it solves, or whether it's created more problems, or whether it's solved more problems than it creates. And the results are positive. About 2/3 of people, in fact 88.8 to 68.8% of Australians to be exact, believe that the internet has solved more problems than it's created. Now, there's a little bit of difference. Men are a bit more likely to think that the internet's solving more problems than it's created than are women. Younger people a little bit more than older people. But you know, there's not much in it. It seems that overall the internet is seen as a good thing. So when we ask them why it's so good, overwhelmingly, it's all about easy access to information of all kinds. And that enables us as a nation to solve problems, whether they're little problems or big problems. It's about staying connected. It's about communities, being in touch with people. That was a really big thing. And overall, making life easier. That move towards zero friction that we're all looking for. The internet has helped. Those of us who are worried about the internet are worried because of the possibility and the reality of spreading misinformation at a rapid rate, fake news and those sorts of things. People are worried about cybersecurity, they're worried about scams, all of those things that we're very well aware of. Some are worried that it distracts from the real world, that if people are actually online, they're not in the real world. So that's an issue for some people. Bullying and harassment is an issue for some people. And just simply too much information is something that is worrying a whole bunch of people. So but overall, it's positive. Overall, it's very positive. So looking back to the idea of 30 years ago, or about then, the birth of the internet, I realised I was actually there in the thick of it. 30 years ago, I was at Melbourne University, and we were looking at those kinds of questions. What are the far-reaching implications of the relationship between man and machine? We were asking questions, as you do as a student, what happens when companies are more powerful than the countries that they operate in? And one of the probably the first and most important projects that I realise now was a project that I was involved in with TRL, the Telecom Research Laboratories, and they did wonderful work in those days. Just cast your mind back to 1981, no mobile phone, no internet, no Netflix, when telephones were telephones. So our job was to actually test what would happen if we added some new features to the telephone. So we added push-button dialing, a microphone that would allow you to talk hands-free, last number redial button, and you could store 3 numbers that you only had to push a button. So these features were amazing. And to create the prototype, it looked a little bit like a small fridge, it was about this big. And my job was to go out and recruit some businesses and people to take the small fridge-like phone and pop it in and see what difference it made to their lives. So we surveyed them before, during and after, and we also tracked all of the activity that happened on their phones. Well, the 2 streams of data showed very interesting things. What did we find? When we asked them, it wasn't super helpful. People didn't think it was all that good, didn't think it was going to change their life, couldn't sort of see why they needed 3 numbers stored, they remembered them anyway. But do you know what happened? It doubled the calls that they made. It doubled their network of people that they spoke to. And so those little tiny things had this explosive impact. Now, isn't that the beginning? We didn't know, but all of a sudden our behaviour changed extraordinarily. So now when we see the changes that we're seeing due to technology and the way that we connect, it all was pretty obvious in those very first days that we were studying these things. So that kind of experience gave me a really irrepressible sense of wonder about the ways that research and technology, working as 2 hands in one glove, can actually help improve the lives of billions of people around the world. Just soon after that, I joined Roy Morgan. By the end of the 90s, the internet, and specifically Google, changed everything. In the first decade of the 21st century, Facebook and Apple iPhone changed everything again. So 2 things occur to me. The first is how amazed I am that Facebook and Google have so quickly been able to change how we work, learn, communicate and live. And the second is actually how recent it all is. We couldn't imagine today living without a smartphone, without Google Maps and GPS. I mean, it's unimaginable. But over a decade ago, there weren't those sort of smartphones. But the revolution of media and transformation of political, social and economic landscapes have actually propelled us at this extraordinary velocity into the future, and into a future that no one predicted. And if they said they did, I'd be really surprised if they're not lying. So the political landscape's changed, for example, really dramatically. And so has the economic landscape. If we look at the world's 10 biggest companies by market capitalisation. Half of them are tech companies: Apple, Alphabet or Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook. And what about the social landscape? Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and all the others have totally transformed how we contact and communicate socially and even professionally. Just started 15 years ago, unimaginable. But there is a downside to this growth when growth is so fast and so far-reaching. And we all know this, but with so many social media users, the potential for misuse of those mountains of data is really big. After all, it's called big data, isn't it? The Cambridge Analytica that claimed to have won the White House for Trump by using Google, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat and YouTube, accessing data from 50 million unwitting Facebook users to target 10,000 different ads to different micro-targeted audiences. So these tech giants that I listed just a moment ago are actually bigger than the economies of most countries. They're certainly more influential. So how can governments respond to these real or potential data piracy or privacy breaches? Well, one thing is really kind of clear. More regulation is not the only answer. There's not just one way. The answer must lie also in sound analysis and common sense. So where's all this leading? We all need to be vigilant and alive to the risks that form that part of this kind of fabric of the digital and data ecosystem that we're playing in. We need to find ways to quantify that risk. Of course, that's Roy Morgan as well. And we're committed to evidence-based policy outcomes. Our world is about data. It's about asking people and making sure we're really capturing what people say. And that's also the aim of Responsibility or Responsible Technology Australia, RTA. So, for example, Roy Morgan, for many, many years, we've been measuring distrust. Who do people distrust? Which companies? And why do they distrust them in a very open-ended way so that we can really pick up what's going on in the zeitgeist? Banks have for over a decade been among the most distrusted brands in Australia. We knew that, we told them that, we were measuring it. Then the risk that was revealed by that soaring trust was pretty much ignored. There was a kind of moral blindness going on. Very dangerous. Well, the outcome of that moral blindness in that industry was the disastrous behaviour of some of the big banks and the subsequent revelations of the Royal Commission. The methodology that we're using to find out what worries people, why they distrust people, is like an epidemiological measurement to measure an epidemic of distrust, of fear. And it's a very decision-making, fact-based management system to identify the risk at the big end of town and give voice to those people at the other end of town. So it is about the people as well as all of the players. But let's be very clear, this is not just about bad behaviour or negative stories. Facebook, after that Cambridge Analytica and the Christchurch mass shooting scandal, Facebook basically became everybody's poster child for evil. Everybody's poster child for the evils of social media. But Facebook understands that trust is clean and they understand that distrust is toxic. All of our data shows that Facebook's distrust is actually decreasing. So that's a really, really good thing. It's decreasing dramatically as they take active steps to improve their position. So I think one of the things that's in our favour as we seek to go forward is once a toxin has a name, once it can be measured, good leaders can recognise it and act on it. It's interesting to note that the government at this stage is actually more distrusted than banks right now, and social media is the most distrusted channel in the media ecosystem. But critically, we don't need to demonise success. It's really easy to demonise success. We need to find a middle path or a third way, a kind of conclusive way that brings people together, leading experts to clarify the conflicts, actually look at them, understand what are the conflicts, to shine a light on a new way. And that's what the RTA way is. So it's our view that the leaders in these huge technology giants are not evil, they're not actively corrupt, but we also know that the bigger the company and the faster it got that way, the greater the potential for moral blindness. and the preparedness to turn a blind eye or look the other way. So we can't have complacency. What we need is vigilance, as we heard earlier today, transparency, and a really smart way forward. And I would love to see a world where the C-suite of every major company, particularly the tech giants, has a new position, a new CEO, the Chief Ethics Officer. Imagine a culture of corporate governance where truth, trust and transparency was the mantra. This is where the ethicist would actually design an ethical lens for use by the CEO and for the company directors on the board to review every decision that was made, and where the decisions that were made were visible, probably up on a website, on the company's website for everyone to see. So that's another reason I'm very excited, and Morgan's very excited to be part of the RTA with its aim to be guided by ethical principles. We've been asking companies for some time to put distrust on their risk register. That's not enough these days. Doesn't go far enough in a world with so much big data, so much personal data and information in the hands of so few. We really need a better way. So finally, I want to say this is not a kind of Pollyanna-ish view. I consider myself a sort of fully autonomous, self-regulating adult, and I think that condition's scalable. I think most of us in this room would like to see ourselves the same way. I don't think most of us like the idea of Big Brother, but nor do we want trust to be just handed out to people who haven't yet earned it. Distrust has got to be the canary in our coal mine. So the new organisation, Responsible Technology Australia, RTA, has the potential to apply that scrutiny and to help the digital platforms, the tech giants and our governments all behave in that more transparent, fully autonomous, self-regulating way. Wouldn't that be refreshing? So in conclusion, my hope and our hope for Responsible Technology Australia is that as it grows and develops and convenes the best thinkers to determine Australia's position on these big questions, it will actually help the tech giants. It'll help our governments and our community find common ground for common good. So we look forward to working with all of you over the next 30 years of the internet. Thank you all.
Okay, well thank you for that, Michelle. That was, I think, a really refreshing sort of take on some of the approaches that we've applied in the past that maybe we can do a bit better. Can I just ask you to listen up? We're about to move. We've had a fair bit of substantive discussion tonight already around some of the sort of heavier issues and maybe some of the reminiscences. But we're about to change gear and we're about to move into a fun component, so I urge you to stay. Yeah, it's time for a bit of fun. Thank you. The first thing I want to do, we're about to unveil some technology here in about 10 minutes. We believe this is a world first. You've seen it here tonight, or you will have, and you'll be able to tell everyone that you're here at the unveiling of the most far-reaching application of this technology for the application that we're about to apply it, and you're probably wondering what on earth I'm talking about. But before we do that, and you'll be invited to put on your hats in a minute too, I want to just, has everyone had a look inside the show bags tonight? Okay, well here's a good time to pull out your show bag. Now look, the first thing we've got to acknowledge is that we've got a very nice book to take away tonight. Thank you to Palo Networks for providing us with this book. I need people down the back just to... We're just recording this session tonight, and I think the background noise is probably we're going to make the video available as a historical record, so if you can just hold up on the conversation for a little bit longer. I want to just take you through the context of the show bag. The party hat, the significance of this is far more profound than you probably realise, and that will be revealed shortly. Before that, we've got a little animal in here. Now this is a reprise from a little gift that we did in 2007, I think it was, in the same venue. And you'll see there's a little slogan there, and if you didn't bring your glasses tonight or the light's a little dim, you can have a look at that when you go home. But that is a tribute to, I guess, the purpose of this evening in a very light-handed way. Also, is your faith in the internet starting to waver? Maybe it is, and so we've given you a packet of Kool-Aid and a glass. And this is a 30-year supply. So if you feel like you're not quite sure if this is the industry and the revolution you want to be part of, I advise you to take out the plastic cup and pour the entire contents of this sachet into the cup. I assure you that it's all natural. And you can consume it tonight and get someone to photograph it, because this is evidence of your commitment to the next 30 years of the internet. So that's the Kool-Aid. We also have a packet of nerds in the show bag. I don't know why that's there, but this is something that you might consume as compensation for not being at home for Halloween tonight. So we're giving you a sugar hit down. We've got some very nice. Remember I said that there's a postcard here, who did we forget? Don't forget to fill that out. We've got some sponsor material. Encrypt Cellular is one of the major donors of some of the prizes that we're going to give away shortly. So thank you to Alex and to Jordan, and we'll be bringing them out in a minute. I'm going to step off the stage. We're going to set up this technology demonstration, and we're going to kick off in about 10 minutes from now. The prize is a substantial one. You will need those tickets in your bag in order to claim. Okay. Okay, we're up. Here's the fun part. Please resume your seats. You're going to need access to your ticket. Thanks, guys. Listen, keep your eye on your raffle ticket that's stapled to the inside of your bag, because your life may be about to change forever. That's a big claim, right? Maybe I'll pull back from that a bit. It'll be interesting. All right. Can everyone please resume their seats? All right. How are we going down the back? All right, here we go. Now, normally at this time of the night, when you're going to do the lucky door prize, are we filming this? Yeah, good. Okay, normally at this time of the night, when you do the lucky door prize, in an analog world, what would you do? You've got the tickets, we've got the stubs. We'd put them in a hat, right? Or a bowl or a box, and we'd pull them out. But when you think about that, you realise it's a pretty non-random draw, right? Because the tickets can stick together, your hand might go into the same part of the container every time, tickets might stick to the inside of the container. It's pretty non-random, right? You agree with that proposition? So what are we going to do? What are we going to do that's world leading tonight? We are going to use a quantum computer. Let me use the story first here. We're going to use a quantum computer that was developed in Australia by a company out of Canberra called Quintessence Labs. Give them a round of applause. I don't know if you know this guy. He's had a bit of an accident which has nothing to do with the machine. But this is Andreas Baumhoff, who is the Vice President of Technology at Quintessence Labs, who is the developer of this machine that we're about to demonstrate. And I'm going to hand over to Andreas, who's going to explain exactly the significance of this application of quantum computing. And I'm going to make the claim. I'm going to make the claim right here we are claiming quantum supremacy in the application of quantum computing for a lucky door prize draw here tonight.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Peter, for having me here. Welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I think you mentioned it's the world's first. Well, we've been producing these machines for a couple of years now, but I think it's the world's first where we use quantum random number generators for lucky door prize. So I certainly think, this is well worth the 30-year celebration. It just goes to show Peter takes things really seriously, and it's also an honor. Quintessence Labs is a Canberra-based company. We produce the world's fastest quantum random number generator. And as it happens, random numbers are really important on the internet. This company would not exist without the internet, obviously. Encryption is something we use every day. Everybody uses this whether you want it or not. And random numbers are a fundamental part of making encryption work. At Quintessence Labs, we produce something called a quantum random number generator, where we don't just produce random numbers based on some pseudo-random bits 0 and 1. We marry quantum physics together with cybersecurity, and this is just one small application, but I think, hey, it's a really cool application for lucky door prize. So I brought a little demonstration for you guys as well to understand what we actually do. So you see this little illustration there. So what we do at Quintessence Labs, we use a phenomenon called quantum tunneling to produce random numbers. Basically, we shoot particles at a barrier that is impenetrable. And you can see these particles hitting this barrier with the Quintessence logo all over it. And in the quantum world, sometimes, fully at random, certain weird things happen. And one of the weird things is that a certain particle can actually take energy out of the other particles and get past this barrier, which is actually never supposed to happen and happens completely at random. And you can see sometimes, particles coming out on the other side. This effect is called quantum tunneling. This actually happens on this machine here that has our PCI card on it. We produce 1 billion random bits every second on this machine. We only need, I don't know how many lucky door prizes we have, 8. So I think we should be doing fine. So I'm ready, Peter, to call the first lucky door prizes. I'm not sure what the procedure is. Should I just click the button and we'll see what happens? Everybody got their numbers ready? It will take 70. I can't do anything else. Sorry, there's no way to read the system. Sorry. I would love to, but.
Yeah, we're good. And we've got Alex coming up too. Now listen, why did I forget to mention Alex Zakharov-Roy as part of the thanks at the beginning? This guy is the man. As you know him, Mr. Gadget. He's not only a technological genius, he's one of the most highly respected technology journalists in Australia. Give him a round of applause. I'm inviting him up because I have a technological deficiency in explaining what some of these prizes are, but he is all over them. And so we're going to do a little bit of fun here, and we're going to start. You all got your tickets? Okay. Now how we're going to do this? If your number comes up from the quantum draw, you're going to come up to the stage, you're just going to stand right there and you're going to wait, because we've got how many prizes? About 8 prizes, mobile phones and some other stuff coming to your place. In 1 second. Alright. Good? Alright. Okay, let's hit.
I'm ready to go. Alright, let's hit the first prize. Let's see where we go. Let's hit those particles, hit those barriers. Quantum tunneling is happening at some stage. And the first is coming. Come on! And the winning ticket is C69. Number C69, yes, the world's first.
triple book set, 3 books tonight. One book is being written, these are all autographed by the authors. One book is The Wire Brown Land by Paul Fletcher. Right, so we've got a copy of the book written by the minister. The other one is Cyber Risk. What's it called? Cyber Risk Leaders. And the other one is by someone else that's up here on the stage. I won't say who. That's your prize, so thank you very much. And you're going to stay here for a photograph. All right, now we're going to the second draw.
All right, the second
Wait a minute, let's tell them what the prize is. What are we giving them? How about this? This one comes to you from Encrypt Cellular. So Alex and Jordan. This is called a key tool. It's a $500 prize. Do you want to explain what this does?
Sure. What it is, it allows you to enjoy privacy and security on your existing Wi-Fi. So it's got a VPN built into it, and it's got auto and ad blocking. You can use Wi-Fi with all your devices. It's also a power bank, 8,000 milliamp hour power bank, and allows you to unblock websites because it's a VPN. So this thing enhances the security of your Wi-Fi network at home, and it's $500 worth of goodness.
And in fact, isn't it also true that if you're in, say, the Qantas Lounge or McDonald's or anywhere where you're using an open Wi-Fi network, that as cybersecurity advisors, of course, we'd say that's a pretty unsafe thing to do, potentially, right?
You need a VPN.
In a hotel. If you use this and access the same Wi-Fi network through this, you're actually VPNing through.
Oh, you probably have to connect to an existing. I'm not sure actually.
All right.
Exactly. Nevertheless, $500 worth.
All right. Let's get going.
Okay, we're going.
Let's go.
I want this thing. Computing sounds quite familiar.
Right, analog.
Right, 56 kilobits. This guy is privacy in privacy, so this could be a better prize. Congratulations. You wait here and we'll get a photo. Yes. Am I good? Thank you. Well done. Alright, good fun. Alright, we're ready for the next prize. What do we got? Okay. I really like this prize. Okay, ready?
This is a good one.
This is a double banger. Right. Everyone needs a laptop bag, right? Or a very large tablet bag. But if you ever can, and so the bag itself is $195, right? But that's not all. Also included is, this is for real, this is an anti-ballistic shield. That will then, when inserted into the laptop bag, will actually render it to be bulletproof.
As long as the bullet is hitting the side that the shield is on.
This could save your life. Used by the FBI in America.
Alright, let's hit the button.
Who's got 827?
Age 27.
I'm 803, so it's not me.
It's not my bag, it's mine. Alright, this is
10, 9, 8, 7, 6. I do not know.
You got it.
It's mine.
Is that it?
Come on down.
Come on.
Hurry, hurry. Pick one there to search.
Come on.
Get run.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to show it an ally anti-ballistic laptop comes here. It's a real shot. Okay, name your bulletproof.
Now this next one, can we just bring up the slide for the cloud secure drive?
We gotta wait. We gotta do that later.
Okay, okay. No worries.
We gotta do the program soon.
Well, we have to do this later, the two last.
Alright, we're doing another set of books. Virtually time by the author. Keep it going. Let's go!
Number 100. Come on down.
Okay, congratulations.
Edward Snowden would love this.
Alright, you might think this is irrelevant to your life, but you'd be wrong. This gift here, which is valued at $110, it's called the Silent Pocket. What it is a Faraday shield for your phone. Alright, now have you ever been gone into a meeting where they ask you to leave your phone outside the room?
No more.
Put it in a little box.
Bring it with you.
So my nation state might be spying on you today. This device, this gift, will solve that problem, so we're going to hit the button, the lines in
Hit the button. B47.
We did not see a foreign intelligence in the second language. You can speak freely now. Alright. Actually, okay. It's going to be tricky. I'm going to go, Alex, can you take us to the second slide? Hold the first one. No, not that one. Not that one. This one. Right, you've seen the slide. Okay, never mind. Right, what are we giving away?
Well, we have
Okay.
two individual people are going to win. This is the Realme XT. This is Australia's first 64 megapixel quad camera phone. And as you can see from the specs, I mean, when I turn it on, it's got a gloriously brilliant screen, in-screen fingerprint reader, ultra wide, which is the new thing in the smartphones. We can see that it's got obviously you've got the dark mode, a 3D curved glass. It even comes with the case in the box. And this is from one of the world's newest brands. They've been around for 17 months. They've got 17 million customers around the world. They just launched 2 weeks ago in Australia. We have the managing director Andy Yan here tonight, who generously donated 2 of these phones. Thank you very much, Andy. The brand, 128 gig storage, 2 SIM cards, and you can put a separate XD cards. So there are 3 cards in there in total. And they're worth $499 each. And the reason why they can have that price is because they don't have retail stores. They're an online operation.
Only online.
And they are flagship phones from Realme, the Realme XD. 64 megapixels. Take a photo and zoom in and zoom in and zoom in. So let's do the draw. One person's going to win and then another one directly after that. So let's flick back to, there we go. Push the button. All right. We're going to dial up the quantum computer. Back to 1993. We have it sounds like Arnold Schwarzenegger, the Terminator.
Let's do the other phone.
Let's do the other phone. The last one.
No, we got more prizes after.
Yeah, one final prize after this. All right. Fire it up. I-44. Who's got the next ticket? 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 44, 3, 2, 1. What's that? Thanks, yeah. We're just hanging back. We're going to take a group photo in a second. And Andy, come up and look for the group photo in a moment. So the final prize tonight, we just bring up the slide again for that, the final prize. So this is called, yeah, we just got to go back. This is called the Cloud Assure. And it is a hardware encryption key that allows you to encrypt the data that you send to your cloud service. It's PIN authenticated, hardware encrypted, it's got a cloud encryption module, on-device crypto chip, brute force defense mechanism. It's immune to bad USB, so if someone's got a USB port that can zap the USB synthesis is immune to it. It is an incredible device, and as you can see, you've got to type the PIN in a pinch. If you really need to, you can turn this into a weapon off of your TV. Except that nobody's watching TV, we're all streaming. So I'm just joking with that. So this thing will allow, there's 2 of these, and the reason why there's 2 is because you can pair one to another. So the CEO can share data with the CTO or the CFO and nobody else. So if you need privacy and security and encryption, this is the device. They're worth $209 each, and someone's going to win the double pack tonight. So let us fire up the quantum computer. We'll go back to the quantum computer slide, hit the button, dial up one last time. Just going to upgrade your security. You'll be immune even from the Terminator. H30, who's got H30? Final prize tonight! One last ride at the quantum Slide one. Yes. H18, come on! Who's got ticket H18? Right, let's go, let's go! Come on down! The security up front of the waist! Come on up to Andy, I'll take a group photo.
I don't need that information.
Okay, here we go. Alright. Now wait.
Okay, group photo of the winners, please.
Wait a minute. Go down there. Or up there. Come up there. Up on this side. Over there. Now, for the people that haven't won tonight, there's a consolation prize for all of you. Just stay tuned because you don't want to miss this. You don't know about the consolation prize. That's true. Well, let's explain the quantum computer. Okay. Where are we going? Okay, here we go. Need the one angle lens. Yeah, to go in there. Ready now. How about a big round of applause for contestant Slash? Thank you. Great Aussie company makes players around the world with their pioneering quantum technology. Alright, now here is the consolation prize. Ready? Okay, cool. Now look, who's worried about government surveillance? Put your hand up. Who's worried about government surveillance? Keep your hand up if you're worried about alien abduction. Alright, now there's more hands went up. Now I'm going to demonstrate on this young man here. Okay, can you all hear? Alright, I'm going to demonstrate on this young man here what the traditional protection against government surveillance and alien abduction looks like. And it would be, of course,
My number, come out, mate. Sorted.
see?
I can see it.
Alright, now,
I feel like this all of a sudden like this breakdown.
so now we're going to test this thing. Is anyone here from the government? Alright. Tell us. Hey guys, come on, we're nearly done. Give us 2 minutes. Come on, just wait 2 minutes. Alright, there's at least 2 good jokes in this, so just hang on. Alright, now, we said that this was the traditional advice for protection against government surveillance of your thoughts, and also alien abduction. And this is not a new theory, this goes back to the early 1920s. If you look up tinfoil hats on Wikipedia, which is the most authoritative source on the internet, you will see reference to the first analysis of tinfoil hats and the theories surrounding how they work effectively to shield us from mind reading and alien abduction. This is fact, it's on Wikipedia, it must be true. Now, of course, who wants to walk around with one of these on their heads, right? Especially at a 30th anniversary party, I mean, really? So what do? We consulted a group of innovators that has managed to incorporate all the features of this time-honoured device into a party hat. Right, are you getting this? Now, is this for the pointy heads in the room?
It is absolutely.
But it's not only for the pointy heads in the room, this is for everyone. Please get out your party hats. We're going to put these on now.
I have double protection now.
Right, good. And here is the corresponding slide. There it is up there. We have the E-Safety Commissioner, Julian Grant, sitting with the innovators of this fascinating device, which not only is foil protected, but contains a prismatic hologram, which gives you added security against surveillance. Let's give Alex a round of applause. Thank you very much. All right, we're about to wrap up the formal part of the night. Can I thank the sponsors again? Are you listening to this, Akamai? Thank Akamai. Responsible Technology Australia. Superloop. Army. Parallel Networks. Encrypt Cellular. Did I get them all? That's it. And to all of you for coming tonight to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Internet, thank you. Please enjoy our hospitality. I think the drink service is about to end, so we're here for another half hour. Feel free to network, recharge your glasses, and we'll see you again maybe next year.